race is not a biological reality, right? We're talking about a social construction. Race is lived, it's experienced, but it's not actually true that we are different races of human, right? And so when we talk about white people, whitelash, white supremacy, we're talking about people who are societally coded in that way. Because what we also know is that those distinctions are malleable over time.
Yeah, sure, they've changed a lot in the course of the 20th century.
Correct, right, and will continue to change, frankly, through this demographic change, as we have more people who are showing up from Central and South America, many of whom would self-identify as white.
Sure.
And so, but I say that to say that if our country was founded on an explicitly white supremacist system, in that people who were coded under law as white had claim to the full promise of American freedom, while people who were coded as black did not have claim to that promise, which is just the fact. It's how we were founded, is what it looked like. That system is a white supremacist system. It's a system that prioritizes and places above others people who are coded as white. We've seen steps over our history to undo that and to create a multiracial democracy. And those steps date back to the revolts of enslaved people, they date to the abolitionist movement, the Civil War, emancipation, and Reconstruction. They date to the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s, and they date to the steps towards the election of a black president. In each of those incidents, what we see is that as people fight to upend a white supremacist status quo, those who are the beneficiaries of that status quo lash out violently in defense of a system for which they are the beneficiaries. And so what we see is that following the revolts of enslaved people, we see massive acts of violence in both interpersonal and in terms of policy, the cutting down on the ability of enslaved people to have access to reading or to education, their freedom of movement. In some cases, quotas on how many new enslaved could be brought to a given colony to make sure that they would not lose an upper hand in terms of maintaining the populations. We see the violence and the backlash to the radical Republicans in the South and the overthrow of multiracial democracy as it was established in Reconstruction. We see the violent crackdowns of civil rights and civil liberties of Black Americans following the Civil Rights era and the Civil Rights Movement. And we see the rise of these white supremacist groups, whether it be the skinheads, whether it be the militia groups, whether it be what we called the alt-right for a while, right? This idea that when white supremacy is threatened, people lash out in its defense. And in those moments, I think those moments are best understood as a white lash.